I recently received some questions from a viewer who was asking about hand washing and what Jesus commanded his disciples, and also his viewpoints on what could harm us whenever it came to food. And from these questions, I think this would be a good opportunity for us to take a look at hand washing again, but also to see the importance of not taking things out of context or not adding things to the text based on what we think the text is saying. Looking at the first question that this person had provided to me, it says, I am very curious as to why you believe Jesus told people to not wash their hands. Now the thing is that I do not believe that Jesus told people to not wash their hands. The text does not actually say that. And what he is referring to is something found in Matthew chapter 15 in verses 1 and 2, where it says, Then the scribes and Pharisees from Jerusalem come to Jesus, saying, Why are your disciples transgressing the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands whenever they eat bread. In this particular passage, there is no place where the scribes and Pharisees actually say that Jesus told people to not wash their hands. You can also go to Mark chapter 7 in verse 5, where it says, Thereafter, the Pharisees and the scribes ask him, Why are your disciples not walking according to the tradition of the elders, but eat their bread with unwashed hands? In both of these instances, the scribes and Pharisees are describing what the disciples are doing, but they're not actually saying specifically what Jesus is teaching. They're simply talking about what the disciples are doing. Now, there are also a couple other statements that this person made. And one thing that he says is, Jesus clearly says several times, food has nothing on it that can harm you, yet we know germs exist. And yes, we do. We do know that germs exist. But what this person is getting at is he is claiming that Jesus says that nothing on food can harm us, as in he's saying that Jesus taught that. And you can also see where he goes on and says, I draw issue with where he plainly states nothing put into your mouth can harm you, since it passes through you and into the sewer. This person is speaking of a few passages in Matthew and Mark. One place where you can get this idea that he's coming up with is in Matthew chapter 15 in verse 11, which says, Not what enters into the mouth desecrates the man, but what goes onward from the mouth, this desecrates the man. And then also in Mark chapter 7, verse 15, There is nothing outside the man that traveling into him is able to desecrate him, but the things which go out from him, those are the things which defile the man. And then also verses 18 and 19. And he says to them, So are you also without understanding? Do you not perceive that whatever is outside travels into the man, is unable to desecrate him, because it does not go into his heart, but into his belly, and travels into the sewer? He said thus, cleansing all foods. So you can see where he's getting some of these questions from. I mean, Jesus does indeed talk about what leaves the body and goes into the sewer. But if you notice, whenever I am reading these texts, there's no statements about what harms one or what makes one ill. He's talking about what desecrates or defiles a person. And also, even if individuals did not know what germs were in the Old and New Testaments, you can still get the indication that they knew that there were some foods that were not suitable to be eaten, that some food were actually quite bad, depending on their condition. You can look in Jeremiah chapter 24 and see the prophet Jeremiah where he has a vision, and he sees 2 baskets of figs set before the temple of Jehovah. And in Jeremiah chapter 24 in verse 2, it says, One basket had very good figs, like the figs that are first ripe, and the other basket had very bad figs, which could not be eaten. They were so bad. So even though Jeremiah did not know about germs, and even though Jesus never makes mention of germs, they still understood that there were some foods that one should not eat. But then there's the question, what about this word for desecrate or desecrates that's found in Matthew and Mark? Does it mean that it could entail harming a person or hurting someone or making someone ill? Well, we can take a look at the word itself, and we can see the use of the word in the New Testament and see what it really means and whether or not Jesus is talking about what harms us. The word that is translated as desecrate or desecrates is G2840. That is the Strong's number for it. And it is found in 12 verses in the New Testament. And looking at an outline of biblical usage that you can find online, you can see that it is used with the idea of to make common, to make Levitically unclean, to render unhallowed, defile, profane, and then to declare or count unclean. This same usage is also found in Thayer's, which will be brought up on the screen in just a moment. If you look at Strong's definitions, it describes the word as making or considering something ceremonially profane, to call it common, defiled, polluted, and unclean. Again, Thayer's has the same outline of biblical usage, but also it has some additional details too. If you look at the verses themselves, you'll find that it is found 3 times in the book of Matthew. In all 3 instances, it is found in chapter 15, which is what we just read from. It's in verses 11, 18, and 20. In Mark, it is found 4 times. Again, only in the passage that we just read from, in chapter 7. And this is in verses 15, 18, 20, and 23. If you continue on and look in the book of Acts, you can find the word in Acts 10:15 and 11:9. In there, it has Peter recalling the vision that he had and where God spoke to him and showed him those unclean animals. Those animals that were common or unclean in the eyes of the Jewish law that God had provided for them. And then you can go and look at Acts chapter 21 and verse 28, where it speaks of the temple and what would pollute that holy place, that would defile or desecrate the temple, according to the Levitical law. Finally, you can look in Hebrews and Revelation. In Hebrews 9, verse 13, there are again references to the things that would be related to the ceremonial law. And then in Revelation 21:27, it speaks about things that would defile or be an abomination. So you can see that looking at all these various verses, nowhere does it ever actually refer to anything that would harm you physically, that would make you sick or ill. And so whenever Jesus is saying things such as, not what enters into the mouth desecrates the man, but what goes onward from the mouth, this desecrates the man. Jesus is saying nothing about what harms you based on what is on food, what makes you sick, that kind of thing. He's talking about what makes one ceremonially unclean. And to say that the word for desecrates is a word that is referring to what harms you, that is taking the definition of the word and tearing it out of its standard usage and changing the definition of the word to suit one's own preconceived ideas. You can also, again, look at the first 2 verses of Matthew 15 and see again that nowhere does Jesus actually say that one should not wash one's hands before eating a meal. It simply speaks of how the disciples were not washing their hands before eating the bread. And so, having looked at all this, I hope that you can see the importance of, even whenever we talk about hand washing in the New Testament, that it is important not to take things out of context and to let the text say what it says without trying to twist it or change its meaning based on any preconceived ideas. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video, and have a nice day.